Welcome to Beyond Expertise, a podcast about identity reinvention for professionals ready to explore who they are beyond their titles and careers. I'm your host, Eric Dickman. Let's get ready to go beyond expertise. Today, I want to talk a little bit about why so many professionals feel stuck right now. As I talk with my peers, as I talk with guests on this podcast, it's a reoccurring theme that people feel stuck. They genuinely feel like they don't know what is the next step in their career, and they're highly anxious about it. Look, we're living in a time of tremendous change. We've got political upheaval, we've got tribalism, and of course, we've got this huge looming change coming with artificial intelligence. And while it's incredibly exciting, and I'm sure we're all having fun experimenting with it in our jobs and our day-to-day lives, there's also an incredible amount of uncertainty about what it means for the future of work and what it means for our professions, our skill set, our expertise, and how that is going to be utilized in the years to come. And I think a lot of people are reaching this point where they feel incredibly stuck because they don't know what the next move should be. I think anybody who has tried to apply for a job on LinkedIn will tell you it's almost a fruitless exercise. There are so many hundreds and thousands of people who apply to some of these jobs that the chance of you even getting a response is next to nothing. And so why would you want to subject yourself to the effort of going through the process of applying to one job after another, knowing that you are just going to be greeted by nonstop disappointment as you don't hear from these companies? So then how do you go and find that next career opportunity? It's very hard. Obviously, leveraging your network, hearing about opportunities that might not be public, getting an opportunity from a network colleague that says, hey, we'd love to have you come work for our company. Those are ideal situations. But those are hard, and those don't come up very often. So I think there's a tremendous amount of anxiety that people have trying to figure out what is the next move, what is the next thing that they should be focused on, because right now they're feeling a little bit stuck and anxious about the future. And look, I'm going to be perfectly candid. I don't have any magical answers to this. I left the corporate world in 2019. At that time, there was a pretty good opportunity for what I do as a fractional chief marketing officer. I was able to come in and help companies on a part-time basis who really needed my expertise but didn't really want to pay for it on a full-time basis. That was a nice niche that was fairly well defined. But then the pandemic hit, and a lot of people all of a sudden were forced from their jobs. And all of a sudden everybody's working remotely. And a lot of people decided that they really liked it. And so this profession that I had gotten into went from being kind of a niche profession to all of a sudden thousands of people wanting to call themselves fractional executives because they liked the ability to work remotely. Maybe they had lost their job as we came out of the pandemic and companies didn't bring people back. Or they just looked at it and said, hey, this is an opportunity that I want to explore. And so that moment in time where there was a real opportunity, all of a sudden it became a very crowded field where lots of people were trying to offer the same kinds of services that I was. And to a large extent, that exists today. But now there's a different problem. AI is coming in, and a lot of companies are saying, hey, we don't need people at all. We can just use tools and processes to be able to do a lot of the work that marketers used to do. And we don't need people who've got these years of experience, who've got this strategic expertise. We can just ask ChatGPT, we can ask Claude. And while I will tell you that that's a fallacy, that doesn't really work that way, that's the mindset that a lot of companies have. They're looking at the world through the lens of expense reduction and saying, how can I get the same value while spending a lot less? And I think a lot of them will regret it in the end because these tools, as great as they are, they still have some significant limitations. They're a productivity enhancer, not a people replacer, especially when it comes to strategic inputs. But this is the era that we're in. All of this is still shaking out. And so when you're feeling this stuckness, that you want to make a change, that you know you need to make a change, but the path isn't very clear, that's the time I think you need to start focusing on little experiments. One of the things that I see so often, and I hear from many people, is that some event happened, they got laid off, they suddenly found themselves without a job, they're trying to figure out what they want to do next, and they decide to go independent. They decide to start up their own business. But they have zero experience running a business. Now all of a sudden, they have to create a company name, they have to buy a company domain, they have to build a company website, they have to figure out who their customers are, what their messaging is going to be. They have to do sales outreach. They have to put on the hat of a salesperson to be able to contact and sell their products and services. They have to become an accountant to understand how to manage their books and pay their quarterly taxes. They have to look at marketing and what it's going to take to stand out amongst all the other people who are selling similar products and services. All of a sudden, all of these roles that they may be used to having somebody inside the larger corporation or business do falls on them. And I will tell you, it's a learning experience. And when you're independent, when you're in a solo business or a small business, you're learning all of this stuff yourself. You usually don't have the money to outsource all of this from day one. You can't hire a bunch of people to do all these functions unless you're independently wealthy and want to invest a lot of money in those kinds of things right off the bat. These are things that you have to learn on your own. And so what I always tell people is start that process of experimentation early, even if it's not ultimately a business that you think is going to be your next thing. You know, maybe it's a small store where you sell some kind of wares on Etsy. Maybe it's some side consulting service where you're engaged in your community offering some small consulting services after hours. Whatever it might be, you get the opportunity to go through the process of establishing that business, of picking that company name, buying that domain, building that website, starting to figure out how to write messaging and sales materials, getting the tools that you need, the infrastructure pieces that you need to run a business. And again, even if that business doesn't amount to much, you're building the muscles. You're going through the exercise of figuring out what it might actually take to run an independent business. And then if you decide to pivot, whether you use the same company name or not, you have the experience, you have the tools, you have the basic infrastructure that you need to be able to then transition it into something else. And it's not unusual for small business owners to have multiple businesses. And I think that's part of the reason why. Once they've gone through that exercise of building one and setting one up, it's not that hard then to layer on another. And so that's what I would encourage a lot of people to do. If you're at that point in your career where you're feeling the heaviness of this uncertainty, of this moment that we're in and not knowing what your future is, now is the time to begin those little experiments. Now is the time to start testing the waters of what it is that you like and don't like. And maybe you go through this experimental process and you determine that you hate it, that you hate doing all this stuff on your own, that you really can't stand running all of these various aspects of your business. Well, right there, that tells you that that's going to be really tough for you if you decide that that's your future. Maybe what you need to do is you need to aggressively start looking for that next career move inside the next company. But I think for a lot of people, what they will decide is that, sure, there are some things they might not like. Maybe you don't like doing accounting, maybe you don't like doing marketing, maybe you don't like doing sales, but the other parts of the business you do enjoy. And so maybe one of the goals will be, when you officially start up the real business, that you will seek to hire somebody, at least on a part-time basis, to help you with those things that you really can't stand. But you don't know that until you get a chance to experiment, until you get a chance to really see the inner workings of a solo business. So I hope you find that helpful. It certainly would have been helpful for me. I was thrust because of a layoff into making that determination whether I wanted to go into another corporate job or start my own business. And I had 6 months of downtime as I tried to figure all that out and get that infrastructure in place. And I tell you, I would be so grateful if somebody had given me that advice that I should have been looking, because the writing was on the wall. I knew that a layoff was probably inevitable, and I should have done more to experiment, to prepare, to see what that next phase was going to look like, because it cost me at least 6 months of time. So I hope you take this as actionable advice. In either case, I would love to hear from you. In the show notes, there's a link if you'd like to reach out. If you're interested in being a guest on this show to talk about these kinds of topics, I'd love to hear from you. Or if you have any questions or comments, please leave those as well. Thanks for listening to Beyond Expertise. You can find show notes, resources, and links mentioned during this episode at podcast.ericdickman.com. If this conversation resonated with you, I hope you'll join me again next time as we continue exploring what it means to reinvent ourselves beyond our careers, titles, and expertise.